Hey everybody, welcome to the last lecture, I believe, for chapter 14. So this last part, we're going to talk about nutrition and metabolism. I have cut out some of the material, so your lecture may be a little longer than what I'm actually going to talk about. Um, but we're going to go over first nutrition. So what are the different nutrients your body needs? And then we're going to talk about basic metabolism and how the body produces ATP energy. So you know that food is used to produce energy, and the food that we take in actually is broken down into amino acids and monosaccharides and fatty acids and glycerol, and then they're used to produce new structures in our body or used to produce ATP. And so the saying you are what you eat is actually true. We take in food, and that's what helps to make our body cells up. So if you eat a diet that's highly rich in delicious vegetables and fruits, then you're going to have cells and a body that reflects that. If you eat more fatty foods, then that's going to reflect or be reflected in your health. I can't really talk. You saw me. I'm not a super thin individual. So, I mean, I eat my fair share of non-nutritious foods, but I do try just like everybody else. So, all right, so let's get into this. If I can get this, there we go. So what is a nutrient? A nutrient is a substance used by the body for growth or maintenance or repair. And there are four major nutrients that our body needs. We need carbohydrates, we need lipids, we need proteins, and of course, we need water. We also need some minor nutrients, vitamins, and minerals, which are typically received from the vegetables and the fruits that we eat. So diets that consist of the 5 food groups usually give us everything we need. And so here are the 5 different food groups. You have your fruits and vegetables. You have your grain products. You have your milk products and your meat products. So those are the 5 different food groups that we typically look at for needing nutrients. And if you look at, in 1992, they came up with the healthy eating pyramid, and they said, okay, these are the things you need a lot of, and then as you went up, you need less and less and less. They've changed that now to the My Plate. So you have the majority is still the majority is now your vegetables, and then grains and fruits. Fruits and proteins make up, a smaller chunk than the vegetables or grains. And then, of course, dairy is still a small subset of all of it. But this is the more relied on food choice. So these are what they're expecting that will be beneficial to maintain normal health. So let's look at where these different nutrients come from. Carbohydrates mainly come from plants or fruits. The exception is lactose is from milk, and there is a little bit of glycogen in certain meats. Fats can come from animals or from plants. So if they are liquid fats, then they are called, or if they are liquid fats, then they are vegetable fats. They are solid fats. They are typically thought of as animal fats. Cholesterol can be found in milk products, in meats, and in egg yolks. Proteins mainly come from animal products, but they can also come from milk. You can get protein. You can get protein from fish, which I would say animal, so I don't know, but people often put meat and then fish as separate. There are 8 essential amino acids, and these amino acids are the ones that our body cannot produce. So we have to get them through the diet that we have. And if you're eating a diet that's rich in like animal meat, then you're probably fine. But if you are not, the 8 amino acids here, tryptophan, methionine, valine, threonine, phenylalanine, leucine, isoleucine, and lysine, are the 8 amino acids you have to take in. Individuals who are vegetarians can get these amino acids just by eating beans and corn. So if you eat these 2 vegetables, along with, the other fruits and vegetables you eat, and depending if you drink milk products, if you have dairy in your diet or not, you'll be fine. But you have to have at least these 2 to give you the essential amino acids that you need for your diet. Vitamins and minerals are mainly found in the vegetables and the fruits that we have, but they sometimes can be found in some of the meats that we eat as well, or the milks. So at this point, you should be able to tell me if the saying "you are what you eat" is really a true statement. What are the 5 basic food groups? Which is more updated, the food pyramid or the My Plate? And what are the 8 essential amino acids? The last part of this chapter talks about metabolism, and it really does not go in very much detail of what is metabolism. So for this exam, you're going to be fine, but if you ever go into an upper level class, you're going to have to learn this again, and I'm not giving you a really great foundation for what cell respiration is. I'm giving you a really watered down version, just so you know. Metabolism is all the chemical reactions that maintain life. So it's all the chemical reactions that each of your body cells has. And they can be broken into 2 subunits, catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism is the breakdown of a large macromolecule into smaller subunits. Anabolism then is the buildup of a large molecule from the smaller subunits. And I always think of it as cats break things. So if a cat jumps on your counter, it's going to break something, hit a cup or whatever, and it breaks it. And so catabolism is the breakdown. Here is, hold on, an anabolic reaction. And this is my example. So here we have all the fixins for a cake. These are all the subunits. We put them together, we add in some energy, and we produce a beautiful cake. And so this is a cell cake, which I think is adorable, right? So then what do we do with the cell cake? We eat it. And when we eat the cell cake, we take in and break down all of those macromolecules into the smaller subunits again. And we release energy in the form of ATP, and we can do work. So that's a catabolic reaction. All right, so the favorite fuel of our body is glucose. Our glucose, all of our cells can use glucose for ATP production. Some of our body cells can only use ATP. And so when glucose is broken down, it's broken down in a process known as aerobic cell respiration. This is one of the mechanisms for production of ATP. It's the most common mechanism. So this is glucose. We add oxygen. And in the process, when we mix these 2 together, we produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP energy. So we break glucose down to carbon dioxide, and we give hydrogens, see these 12 hydrogens? They attach to oxygen, producing water. There are 3 main events that occur. The first is called glycolysis. So glycolysis, we're breaking down a glucose in a process known as lysis. Lysis is breaking it in half. Okay. This occurs in the cytosol. It is an anaerobic process, which means no ATP, no oxygen is required. In this process, we produce a small amount of ATP. So this is a standalone mechanism or pathway for some organisms. If you ever take a microbiology class, you'll learn that glycolysis is the mechanism that some organisms use only. That's it. Those are anaerobic organisms. We use glycolysis, and then we move the end products of glycolysis into the mitochondria. So in aerobic respiration, this is the first step. So we take and activate a glucose molecule, and then we break it into 2 pyruvic acids. Once we do that, the pyruvic acids are going to be moved into the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. So basically what we do is we're going to take the pyruvic acid, shove it into the mitochondria. It's then going to be converted into an acetyl group, which will enter the Krebs cycle, and we're going to get rid of the entire molecule. And again, in this process, we produce a small amount of ATP. The last step then is called the electron transport chain, where we are going to produce almost all of our ATP while we shuffle hydrogen ions across the membrane in the production of the ATP. So let me show you what this looks like. Here we have the glycolysis. So we have glucose moving in and pyruvic acid being produced. In this process, we produce a small amount of ATP, just a little bit. The pyruvic acid enters the citric acid cycle, and all of the carbons that were in the pyruvic acids are going to be released through, are going to be released and attached to oxygen, producing carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of aerobic respiration, which is why we exhale carbon dioxide, because we're always producing it. In this process, again, we're going to produce a small amount of ATP. The end product here are going to be coenzymes called NADH and FADH, and all of them are going to go over to the electron transport chain, where they're going to produce a ton of ATP and water as a waste product. So the energy of the electron transport chain comes in the form of these electrons that are released. I told you NADH and FADH are what deliver or are what bring the hydrogens to the electron transport chain. They release electrons to electron carriers. Those electrons activate the entire electron transport chain, and they help to pump hydrogens to one side of a membrane. When you have a high concentration of hydrogen ions on one side of a membrane, it actually causes those hydrogen ions to want to move from higher to lower concentration. So they're going to move back across the membrane through an enzyme called ATP synthase. Oh, sorry. And that's what produces the majority of the ATP energy. So during carbohydrate metabolism, you can, I won't say during, but when you take in too much glucose, or if you have too much glucose in your blood, that's called hyperglycemia. And typically what happens is the excess glucose is going to be stored as fat or glycogen. Hypoglycemia then is low levels of glucose, and in that case, you're going to have to produce new glycogen. Or I guess I shouldn't say that. You're going to have to produce new glucose. That's what I want to say. So we talked about metabolism, carbohydrates. You can metabolize polysaccharides, disaccharides into monosaccharides, and monosaccharides can then be broken down to produce your ATP. Fats, which are used in the body to insulate or protect organs, can be used to produce ATP too. In this case, we're going to break the fats down in a process called beta oxidation. And so beta oxidation cuts the fatty acids into small pieces, which can then be used to produce ATP. We see this often in individuals that have diabetes mellitus, in individuals that are doing no carb diets, or they go into ketosis, and oftentimes this can lead to other problems in the body, unless they are doing it under a medical persons. And then we have proteins. Proteins can also be used to produce ATP. But again, if we're going to use proteins, they're going to have to be broken down into amino acids. And then the proteins are going to have to, they're going to have to remove the amine portion. The amine has to be released, and then the rest of the amino acid can be broken down to produce ATP. This is not a common process, though. So what organ typically helps in breaking down proteins or breaking down fats or breaking down carbohydrates so that we can produce ATP? The liver is actually the organ that helps in digestion of these materials. So we talked about the liver as part of the digestive system in producing bile, but it has so many other functions. It detoxifies, and it helps in production of certain proteins, and it plays a role in our metabolic activities. So the most common role in metabolism is it's going to help in controlling glucose levels associated with our hormones. So normal blood glucose levels right here, but if something causes our blood glucose levels to rise, so then glucose in the liver, so that would cause insulin to stimulate the liver to start producing glycogen from the glucose. Glycogen is going to be stored, and that process is known as glycogenesis. If our liver is stimulated by glucagon because we have low blood sugar levels, that's going to cause our liver to start breaking down the glycogen back to glucose, and that's known as glycogenolysis. But we can also produce new glucose. So gluconeogenesis is the production of glucose from fats or amino acids. And so that allows us to produce glucose that can then be used for ATP production. We see this in response to a lot of stressful activity, and we're in a very stressful environment. Hold on. So fats can be picked up by the liver. So these are other functions of the liver that I'm going to talk about. And fats can be oxidized to produce energy, or they can be stored and or broken down, depending on what our body needs. Proteins, so the liver produces proteins from amino acids that it picks up. Albumin is the most abundant protein in the blood. The liver also produces clotting proteins. The liver functions in breaking down or detoxifying ammonia, and then getting rid of carbon dioxide from the ammonia, producing urea, which then can be released from the body either through sweating or in urine. The liver produces the majority of cholesterol. So cholesterol is never used to make ATP, but it is used in producing a lot of our hormone molecules. Most of the cholesterol that we have in our body is produced by the liver. Only a small amount actually has to come from our diet, only about 15%. And so the last thing I'm going to mention is the amount of energy. So the food we take in gives us energy. Food intake has to equal, energy intake has to equal energy output. And if it doesn't, it can lead to different disorders. The two most common disorders that I'm just going to quickly mention is obesity and malnutrition. Obesity is probably one of the most common disorders in the U.S. right now. It leads to a lot of other problems like type 2 diabetes, as well as a lot of depressions. Malnutrition is not as common as obesity, but it is a problem in the U.S. as well as in many other countries. I'm going to leave it at that for this chapter. It's been a long chapter as it is. So at this point, you should be able to tell me what metabolism is, what catabolism and anabolism is, what is aerobic respiration, where does this occur, so what organelle does aerobic respiration occur in, what are the basic steps, how are fats and proteins broken down, what does the liver do in metabolism, how much of the cholesterol that we have in our body is produced by the liver, and the two major disorders that I mentioned about associated with energy imbalance. I'm going to stop here and I'll get these uploaded as soon as I can. Have a great night. Bye.